Hey everyone, Josh Wigler here, host of Series Regular, with a quick warning about what you are about to listen to. If you have not yet watched the final season premiere of HBO's Game of Thrones, do that before listening to this podcast. This podcast is going to discuss that first episode of the final season in great detail. Once you've watched, please return and enjoy the show. Welcome back to Series Regular, the Hollywood Reporter's deep dive podcast into genre television. I'm Josh Wigler, your host here on Series Regular, and for the next several weeks, we're all in on one thing and one thing only: Game of Thrones. Consider this your weekly window into the world of Westeros as we thoroughly explore each episode of the Emmy-winning epic's final season. And in that spirit, we can now thoroughly explore the first episode of the Emmy-winning epic's final season. The Season 8 premiere is officially out in the universe, and I am so excited to get to talk about it with THR's chief TV critic, Dan Fienberg. Dan, how are you, my friend?
I am doing well, Josh, and I am looking forward to having some spoilerific conversation about the Game of Thrones premiere.
It's been tough to sit on this without anyone to talk to. I've just been alone in my cave scrawling barely legible Game of Thrones rantings on a wall that I would then transpose into article form for THR.com. But other than that, I've just been on my own with all of this, and I'm thrilled to finally be able to speak to someone because we were both at the New York City premiere. We both saw this episode, and now the world has seen this episode as well.
And you have been remarkably prolific. I feel as if I have written very little about Game of Thrones. My review is probably up on THR as we speak. But yes, you've been writing, like 17 articles a day for THR?
Yeah, something in the vicinity of that. I think that's a pretty close approximation.
Vaguely insane, but you do terrific work, Josh.
I appreciate it, Dan. All right, so we're going to drill into this episode in specific detail now that we can. As we've mentioned, Dan and I both saw the episode at the world premiere in New York earlier in April. I've been dying to talk to anyone about how the first episode played out. So today we're going to do exactly that. We're going to talk through the final season premiere, not in scene-by-scene detail, but our broad strokes reactions to the episode and how it seems to be setting up the remaining story, scenes that were standouts, and more. So first of all, Dan, before we get into it, I would just love to get your first impressions. What was your reaction to the final season premiere?
My reaction to the premiere was that it's the kind of thing where if you're sort of a destination-oriented viewer and you're the kind of viewer who's like, seriously, dudes, there are zombies coming, stop standing around and talking. It was a very kind of talky, putting the pieces back in order on the chessboard kind of premiere. But it happens that my pleasure in the show at this point comes largely from watching character interactions. And so I was completely satisfied on that level, even if I understood really there are important issues and there are only 6 episodes in which to deal with them. So maybe this was a little bit thumb twiddling. What was your overall thought?
Yeah, I think that there was almost no way that this first episode wasn't going to be something of a table setter. I think that given everything that's at stake, given the fact that there are so many characters who just have not met yet, or characters who haven't seen each other in so long, you're going to need to take care of a lot of business with reintroducing characters to each other, introducing characters to each other for the first time, and that's going to naturally lend itself to a fairly talky episode, which is, often anyway how a lot of the season premieres of Game of Thrones play out. But I think the newness of the conversations for me, that always felt to me like this was going to be an exciting episode. I think the things that I love about Game of Thrones so much are very much of that variety, very dialogue driven, seeing disparate people come together, much more about that than taking on the Night King, though I'm here for that as well. But I think that really making sure that all the pieces are in place so that the rest of the 5 episodes can kind of catch up and play ball with knowing who these people are and what they mean to each other, and really starting to take form in terms of these new relationships that are going to drive the rest of the action, I think was pretty critical. Do you think that the majority of people are going to be happy with this premiere? Do you think that the majority of people are going to find this slow? Like, as best as you can, try and take the pulse on that.
And the thing I love is that I was about to ask you the exact same question. So yeah, we'll see what the answer ends up being. I mean, my feeling has always been that I've liked watching the characters. And then I'm always kind of surprised when people on Twitter and whatnot come across as more disappointed by things when that's the direction in which they go. And you see kind of the lists of everybody's favorite episodes. And, you know, the whole world has published their top 10 Game of Thrones episodes list in the past couple weeks. And there really is an overwhelming balance towards, or imbalance towards, the action episodes, the penultimate episodes of each season, which have been kind of crazy and high stakes and all of that. And I feel as if there definitely is a portion of the fan base that requires that degree of adrenaline and probably didn't get it from this premiere. So my hunch is a pretty solid split, that some people are going to be like, look, we don't have the time for this. You know, it's something I led my review with Bran interrupting everybody talking in the courtroom saying, we don't have time for this. And I feel like there are going to be a lot of fans who agree with that assessment. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Although for my money, and I don't know what it says about me. I'm a sick person, I think. But the moment that I saw that there was this brand new title sequence, I was instantly so excited, which I think says a lot more about me as a Game of Thrones nerd than anything else. But to know that the story is collapsing so much in on itself, that the sprawling sequence of seeing everywhere in the world of Westeros and beyond, and all these different cities, we're not doing that anymore. We're really drilling down very, very granularly into Winterfell, into King's Landing, and my theory brain is already firing on all cylinders, wondering how much attention should we be paying to the nitty gritty corners and nooks and crannies of Winterfell as we're getting to see them in that opening sequence, knowing that the Battle of Winterfell is coming up some episodes from now. It's just I was already lit, and the show hadn't even started. So I have to imagine that there is a contingent of Game of Thrones fans who really love this material that were feeling the same way. And I have to feel that way, because if not, then I feel like it says a lot about me as a person, and I'm not ready to look into the mirror that deeply.
If it makes you feel any better, definitely in the group of people that HBO sat me with at the premiere, it was largely reporters, but not exclusively. And there were definitely pockets of that group who, when the opening credits started going inside buildings and underground, those people, you could hear them go, ooh, new credits, not just the big map, you know. So you're not alone, would be my guess. On the other hand, I don't know that every viewer is going to be like that. I feel like probably there are probably really, really bad Game of Thrones viewers who fast forward through the credits. I don't even want to know who those people are, frankly.
I agree. All right. Well, we talked a little bit about the fact that this is an episode filled with people coming together for the first time, or for the first time in a long time. This premiere episode, it has this full circle quality about it. It connects back to the very first episode of the series, Winter is Coming. And all the way back in 2011, the Game of Thrones pilot centered on Robert Baratheon and his royal procession arriving at Winterfell. 8 years later, a new Iron Throne contender arrives in the north, Daenerys Targaryen. The result, new character pairings, reunions between loved ones and enemies alike, and lots of tension. Did any of these table-setting scenes and character collisions particularly stand out to you, Dan?
I've discovered in recent seasons that, and I don't think this was the case at the beginning, that Arya is my favorite character on the show, and that Maisie Williams is my favorite actor on the show. And I don't have a clue what her career is going to be like after this. I don't know that I see big movie stardom or anything for her, but she is so good at conveying so much in just a look. And so I just loved that opening procession where one character after another is coming towards Winterfell, and you just get to see Arya react to each of them. And it's kind of like a previously on segment, because you're sitting there going, oh, right, that's when that character last saw Arya, or, oh, right, Arya wanted to kill that character, or something like that. So all of those reactions, whether it's just the little smiles, or whether you see sort of the tightening around her eyes as she starts glaring at people, I loved that opening scene with her reacting to things. I could have watched 45 minutes of that, I think. So that would be the top of my list. What's the top of your list in terms of interactions?
I do think Arya Stark seeing dragons for the first time was pretty spectacular, and I loved the way that kind of contrasted very quickly with the way that Sophie Turner as Sansa is reacting to the grandeur of the arrival of Daenerys Targaryen in Winterfell. You know, Sansa is a hard person to impress these days, and I don't think she was particularly impressed by all of that. So I enjoyed that sort of dichotomy within the Stark sisters in particular. I think the one that excited me the most was, you know, there's lots of little ones that are really great. You know, Arya reuniting with Gendry, or seeing the Hound again for the first time in a very long time. The last they saw each other was, you know, very violent, and it was grim circumstances. But I really loved the ending of this episode. They ended it in a way where I want to go right into episode 2. I wish that we could be binging it with Jaime showing up in Winterfell, and across the way, as he, you know, is very much a stranger in a strange land, really the least welcome person in the room, and the very first person he sees and recognizes is the kid he pushed out a window at the end of the very first episode of all of Game of Thrones with Bran. So I'm really excited to see what that is setting up, how we're going to follow that down. That really is, in so many ways, that was the first, you know, before Ned Stark lost his head, before there was a Red Wedding, Bran being, you know, this small child who loves nothing more but climbing, you know, the towers of Winterfell, getting pushed from a tower by this incestuous monster, is really the first big whammy of Game of Thrones. And to end in that kind of full circle way in this first episode of the final season, I thought was a very exciting choice.
I thought that was wonderful. I you know, speaking of sort of a lot of the, you know, basically the way a lot of characters stop seeing each other in Game of Thrones is something horrible happens and they have to go different directions. So having Sansa and Tyrion reunite and kind of remembering the exact circumstances around their last interactions and how it was all at Joffrey's wedding and how awful that was a wonderful scene for me as well. And, you know, Peter Dinklage is always wonderful, and Sophie Turner has proven as the seasons have gone along just how good she is. But you know, it's so many things like that. How about new interactions between characters? Was it everything you hoped it would be to have people interacting with Daenerys who had never experienced her before?
Yeah, I thought that was great. And I really liked the scene between her and John Bradley as Sam. I was wondering quite a bit about how Sam was going to react to the news that his father and his father, who he really did not care for at all, but his brother, who he liked quite a bit, that they were both roasted alive by Daenerys. And I loved how that kind of fueled him into the next scene, with him finally getting that moment with Jon Snow, which we'll definitely talk about in greater detail. I enjoyed that quite a bit. I'm not so sure that I'm excited about Sansa and Daenerys being at each other's throats, if that's the direction we're going in. I think that's where I start to find myself in the camp that you described earlier, of like kind of looking at the watch and being like, okay, we're running out of time. There is not a lot of Game of Thrones left. So I think if we're really bearing down into that as a subplot for the final season, it's going to feel a little similar to me as what we got in the penultimate season with Arya and Sansa and them not getting along, and that feeling like a really maligned storyline. I think pretty easily, for me, one of the worst in recent Game of Thrones memory. If we start really getting into that same territory with Sansa and Daenerys, I think I'm going to start rolling my eyes a little bit. Yeah,
powerful women bickering is such a fairly boring trope, and it doesn't go anywhere interesting, as opposed to, as you mentioned, the Sam Dany scene worked for me because the easy reaction in that scene is Daenerys reveals to him what she did, and Sam hears, and, you know, he has a brief moment of horror, but then goes, yeah, I didn't really like my father anyway. Well done. Hoorah. I'm now totally Team Dany, whatever. And the fact that at least for one episode, he didn't let it slide, and that he actually, you know, had conflicted responses. I appreciated that they were able to take the time for that conflicted response rather than just skipping to reconciliation, which they certainly could have done.
Yeah. And then really quickly before we move on, it wasn't the first time these characters had met, but it was the first time in a few episodes at least. And I just have to say, tip of the hat to Game of Thrones for really yada-yada-ing the whole Theon has to rescue his sister storyline and just getting that done immediately. I really appreciated that. If we had a season-long storyline of Theon on some epic quest to save Yara Greyjoy, I was not here for that. So to have that handled in truly 2 scenes was a spectacular choice that I appreciate so much.
Well, every bit that they would have dragged it out would have marginalized her, and I don't think they want to marginalize her as a character. And it also would have taken away from the fact that he clearly has a bigger journey that he has to go through than just getting his sister. So I appreciated that they got that out of the way quick. And then I think we're about to talk about the other thing that I appreciate they got out of the way quick.
Yeah, let's get into that. So it's not the final moment of the episode, but it's easily one of the most anticipated moments in Game of Thrones lore, and that is Jon Snow learning that he is not the son of Eddard Stark after all, as he has believed his entire life. He's actually the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, which means he is the heir to the Iron Throne. And this was one of the most hotly debated theories in the Thrones fandom for years and years, and the show has slowly revealed the answer over the course of the past few seasons. We first got a tip of the answer in the season 6 finale when Jon was revealed to us, the audience, as Lyanna's son. Then in season 7's finale, Bran and Sam put 2 and 2 together about Jon's backstory. And now here we are in the final season premiere, the news finally reaching Jon Snow's ears. Now he knows the truth. Did you have a strong reaction one way or the other, Dan, to how all of that played out?
I had a strong reaction to the fact that they didn't draw it out. And that was my strongest reaction, is they really and truly could have gone 5 or 6 episodes and maybe had it revealed in episode 4 or 5. And I wholly expected that this was something that was going to get dragged out forever. Now, of course, we haven't gotten to Jon confronting Dany about it, and that could take another 3 or 4 episodes. But I appreciated that they got down to business. I appreciated that his immediate reaction wasn't just to go and throw up, as over the incest,
which would have been understandable.
I kind of wondered if that was going to be something that was not necessarily the throwing up, but if they were going to address that immediately and directly. No, I liked that they got it at least partially out of the way, because otherwise it was just going to be treating Jon as stupid throughout, and that didn't really seem to serve any purpose. So no, I'm very glad. It kind of amuses me walking from the premiere to the premiere event afterwards. I walked by no fewer than 4 people having conversations where they're still trying to sketch out the family tree and explain to people how those characters are related to each other and how this puts Jon in the position he's in. So while it has been a fan theory forever, it's been a fan theory among a very particular group of fans, and there's also another group of fans who are still damn confused by the whole thing, I would say.
What are the odds that in this final season, at some point, either in the next episode or a few after that, we will have characters on screen really trying to sketch that out, exactly what that looks like? So wait a minute, does this mean your girlfriend is your aunt or is she your cousin? I'm not quite sure that I'm following along.
And also, in a world in which Cersei is about to have yet another one of her brother's children, is it really taboo to a degree that it's actually truly problematic? Or can we really kind of brush it off and go, these things kind of happen, whatever?
There's historical precedent within the Targaryen family anyway, so.
Exactly. It's no big deal. No one should stress out. I'm trying to think of who the character would be who would allow them that kind of sketching, because the show is so full of characters who like to believe they're so smart and would be able to figure it out. Who is the character who would actually require a roadmap to be drawn? That would be my question.
Yeah. Maybe Davos Seaworth is somebody who comes to mind for me, because you could imagine everybody kind of getting together in the same room to kind of just get on the same page about this big reveal. And Varys knows his family history. He served the Mad King once before. He presumably knew Rhaegar Targaryen. Tyrion's an intelligent guy. He reads history. He's a big history buff in Westeros. Davos is, I say he's meat and potatoes, but he's onions, right? He is very salt of the earth. And I feel like Davos, who had that really funny line in season 7 when Jon Snow and Daenerys meet for the first time, and Missandei gives the big rollout of Daenerys' titles, and Davos just responds by, "This is Jon Snow. he's king in the north. I feel like he might be somebody who needs to be walked through exactly what's going on here. So he would be the person that I could imagine.
I think Davos and Bronn are the two characters whose reactions would be the most profane to the whole thing, and that would make their reactions the most entertaining to the whole thing. So that would be what I would want.
I'm with you, though, that I'm glad that it wasn't drawn out. I was actually concerned that we may have found ourselves in a scenario where Jon himself never found out. That, it could have been the thing where Sam and Bran see that Jon and Daenerys come back to Winterfell, and they're very clearly a romantic couple at that point, and maybe they don't want to shake things up, or there's some other reason why they can't get the news to Jon. And I would have been concerned about the storytelling pace of that decision. So to just get that done, to at least have Jon know, and then we can kind of see him internally debate how he's going to tell Daenerys and how this is going to come out, I think is a good choice.
Well, it's kind of one of the recurring themes of the show is basically people telling Jon Snow he's an idiot, and whether it's the woman he loved when it was agreed or Lyanna Mormont here, I really appreciated how many people told Jon Snow that what he did and what he has done was kind of a betrayal of what they entrusted him with. I like that the show both appreciates the character and his kind of moral underpinnings, but also appreciates that he, like his not father, but his raised father, is too often caught up in his sense of nobility and often does really stupid things that a more sensible person would not. And the show doesn't mind telling him that, and I appreciate that.
All right, let's move on from Winterfell for a little bit, because most of the episode takes place in Winterfell, but there are a couple of exceptions, including a lengthy side trip to King's Landing, which is the site of the Iron Throne. Cersei Lannister, she remains large and in charge at the heart of Westeros, but few people expect it's going to stay that way. Dan, did the season premiere move you one way or the other in terms of who might wind up on the Iron Throne at the end? And maybe just as importantly to you, how much does that question matter in terms of your enjoyment of the final season?
I think it will matter in exactly the one moment where they decide that they want to tell us who's going to be there. And if it plays right, I'll go, okay, they at least did it in a way that played right. And if it plays wrong, I'll raise my eyebrow in confusion. But in terms of kind of the build up to it and whether or not, thankfully I have not needed to write who are the 10 people most likely to sit on the Iron Throne story. But I know plenty of
surprisingly,
very, very smart,
neither have I.
which is great. You've done plenty of other wonderful content that kind of circles that without actually needing to do it.
Absolutely.
But so I'm glad I haven't had to do that, because I really don't care. Like I understand on kind of a sensibility level the characters who make more and less thematic sense to sit on the throne and who kind of wields power in the way that would put them there. And so I know, for example, that it makes no sense for Varys to end up on the Iron Throne. That's not who he is. It would be like electing Karl Rove president. So if that ends up being what it is, I would raise my eyebrow. But for the most part, no, that's not a thing that bothers me. And at least in the short term, I like watching Cersei sitting on the throne, sneering at people and raising her eyebrows. That to me is enough.
So let's look at the context of the episode and match that to some of the people that I think are the obvious contenders for the Iron Throne. And let's start with Cersei. She's in the Iron Throne. Is there any chance that the show is going to end with her still on the Iron Throne, using this episode as fuel for your answer one way or the other?
I think that would be a bore, honestly. I think that would... Yeah. She's spent so much time being there and sometimes literally sitting on it, but sometimes not. I don't think that would be exciting. It would be a little bit like a college football season that starts with Alabama as your preseason number one and ends with Alabama as your postseason number one. Anyway, it's like, okay, we just went through an awful lot of work to get to the place where we were when we started. So I would hope Cersei will not be on the Iron Throne, not because I don't like booing for the character and I think Lena Headey is great, but I would say no. You?
Yeah, I think unless they, David Benioff and Dan Weiss really want to tell a scathing indictment story of mankind, I don't think that Cersei Lannister stays on the Iron Throne. I don't think that's the story they're trying to tell. I think that the likeliest candidates, at least sort of the out in the front of the race candidates, are Jon Snow and Daenerys. Jon Snow really because of birth, not because of desire. I don't think that he's somebody that would want this burden. And I liked the way that played out here when he learned that he is Rhaegar Targaryen's son, that his, primary concern is, this is Daenerys's thing. This isn't my thing. I wonder for you if you felt like the revelation and the way that it played on Jon, did you interpret it in a way where he was concerned about how this would impact Daenerys principally? Did you read it in a way where it's starting to dawn on him that, oh, actually I might be a contender for this thing? Do you feel like there's any shot of Jon being the guy at the end?
Well, I think Jon is aware that he's a person who keeps being put in positions of authority that, at least in terms of basic qualifications, he doesn't have. He wasn't really qualified to be in charge of the Night's Watch. He wasn't really qualified to be the King of the North. Now he would be qualified by birth to be the King of Westeros. But what I can imagine Jon ending up on the throne with 20 minutes to go in the finale, and then proposing open democratic elections.
Yeah.
And then melting down the Iron Throne and walking away. That is the context in which I can imagine him ending up in charge, insofar as the second he was put in charge, he would say, no thanks, I think.
Yeah, that's the best King Snow theory I've heard. I would be okay with that. How about Daenerys? Because there's a lot of open questioning of Daenerys's leadership style in this episode, with Sam, who's typically the most level-headed person in the room, often the voice of reason on this show, being the one who's coming to Jon and saying the way she runs her business is really scary and probably not as good as the way that you would run this business. Do you feel like the premiere did anything for you in terms of kind of scaling back the odds for Daenerys, who for so much of Game of Thrones has been viewed by a large swath of the audience, at the very least, as the likeliest contender to end the series on the Iron Throne?
To me, she can only end on the Iron Throne if the show is aware that it's not good. And if the show is aware that basically when you give Daenerys too much power, she's, like everyone else, she's a questionable ruler. She sometimes is vengeful in ways that perhaps she could stand to be forgiving. She sometimes is autocratic in ways that she could stand to perhaps listen a little bit better. I think if the show recognizes that on one level it makes sense for her to be on the throne, she has dragons, it's tough to argue with that. But if the show also is able to say, okay, but her tendencies maybe aren't the best tendencies, and we think this is something we want, but maybe we don't. That would be how I would view it. Like, I don't think it can end with her on the Iron Throne as pure and uncluttered and triumphant. If it does that, I think I would be ticked off. How about you?
I like, honestly, kind of transposing your idea for Jon Snow onto Daenerys. There's the great line from Daenerys back in season 5, I believe, where it's one of her very first conversations with Tyrion Lannister, and it's her big speech about how I don't want to, reshape the wheel. I want to break the wheel. She wants to completely shatter the Westeros status quo, and shattering the Westeros status quo would mean an end to dynasties, not having some return to glory for House Targaryen, but actually doing something for the people, actually doing something that is fairer for the realm, and having the realm have a voice in who's going to lead them. So I like that for Daenerys, but I'm very curious to chart the journey of people's reactions to Daenerys Targaryen and her reactions to those reactions along the way, because there have been a lot of moments since she's come to Westeros where she's really stuck in her old ways and really feeling like this is her destiny, and she's driving toward it full force, and nothing should stop her, and this is what she was meant for. And as long as her storyline sort of stays in that space of her rejecting advice from people who we as the audience know to either be reasonable or reasonable enough, I think that's going to send up red flags for me when it comes to Daenerys' shot.
I think ultimately what I'm rooting for is either the somebody sits on the Iron Throne with 15 minutes to go and says, this is a really stupid way to have power, and no one ends up sitting there, or that it ends up being Arya, but with someone else's face.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, are there any wild card picks for you based on this episode? A lot of screen time for Arya Stark. Maybe you're onto something.
I think Arya with someone else's face sitting on the Iron Throne would make me happy, but that could just be because I like Arya. Who you got as your dark horse?
I have been saying, I don't know how dark of a dark horse it is, because I think the theory is out there that I could imagine a scenario where Gendry is on the Iron Throne by the end. You know, we begin the series with a Baratheon on the Iron Throne. He's the last Baratheon standing, which is not a successor show that is in the works at HBO, as far as I know. I think for him to kind of be able to correct his father's mistakes, whether that's through, marriage to Daenerys and the two of them are ruling, and it's some sort of commentary on if the Targaryens and the Baratheons can heal their rifts, then why can't we all? Is something that's a direction I could see the show going in. But to be completely honest, I officially can't stop thinking about Arya wearing somebody's face and being in charge of Westeros. I had never thought about it, and now I really, really like it, and I hope that you're right.
Excellent. I will definitely hold on to that as my official prediction going forward.
Yeah, it's good. I think it's good. All right, so that's a lot of specifics from the episode. I'd love to kind of just talk a little more broadly about what's next. With the premiere officially ended, we're down from 432 minutes of Game of Thrones remaining to 378 minutes left. There's only 378 minutes of Game of Thrones left. There are only 5 episodes to go. Dan, how are you feeling about David Benioff and Dan Weiss's ability to wrap all of this up in a satisfying way, given the way the premiere played out? And also, what am I going to do with myself once Game of Thrones ends? Do you have any suggestions?
Okay, well, first of all, the answer to the second question is Survivor's never going to end, so you're okay.
That's true. I hope. Please, from your lips to the Survivor God's ears.
I do not think there is any concern that you are suddenly going to be franchiseless. So
okay,
that is at least my reassurance to you, and I'm sure you can also dedicate plenty of time to trying to make sense of Westworld.
Yes, this is good for my anxiety. I just need somebody to talk some sense into me. I appreciate it.
I think you will be fine. Yeah. Now, as for whether I feel as if Benioff and Weiss can wrap this up in a satisfying way, I'm a little skeptical of them, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I think there's a chance that they can wrap it up on a superficially satisfying level. And that if we dig deep beneath it, we'll probably start getting frustrated by it. But like 5 minutes after the finale, I can imagine us saying, oh yeah, that was cool. That was exactly how it should have ended. And then about 2 weeks later, we could be like, it was an okay finale. And then about a month later, we could be like, God, okay, it's time to redo the finale for Game of Thrones. If I had to guess, I think that's probably the finale that we're going to end up with. I would love to be proven wrong and for it to be wonderfully nourishing, satisfying, and an in-depth critique of power and everything, and we'll see. But if I had to guess, I would guess superficially satisfying, but not nourishing.
And what about, I'm going to have Survivor after this, and Westworld will return someday. But what are we as a television viewing nation going to do once Game of Thrones ends? This is the only show that's on TV, right?
Definitely, you would certainly think that, given the past couple weeks of coverage by most of the people I respect most on the interwebs. Yes, it would appear this is all there is. And I think that a lot of the other networks have kind of made that into a self-fulfilling prophecy that, you had things like Hulu saying, okay, yeah, we're not going to bother with a new season of Handmaid's Tale this month. There's no reason to attempt to compete with that. You had HBO,
a lot of people dodging Dragonfire.
I think so, and a lot of the shows that are kind of good and worth talking about have simply gotten out of the way for one reason or another, and so it's become the only thing we can talk about. The honest answer is that I've seen a lot of my colleagues write variations on is this the end of our communal TV experience, blah 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 stories, and my response is no, it's not. It's the end for one particular show, and there will be another in the next 2 or 3 years that will do, if not the identical thing, something comparable. And I don't believe that we have ceased to have communal experiences. Maybe the communal TV experiences have become more condensed or niche-y or whatever you want to say. They've become smaller communal experiences, but let's not fool ourselves into thinking that Game of Thrones is the MASH finale. It's not. We give ourselves the illusion that it's something this wide, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still a show that is watched on a network that not everyone in America gets, that not everyone in America can afford. So there's already a barrier of entry that is a genuine and financial one. It is a show with great limitations in terms of its audience reach, in terms of racial inclusivity. It's a show that is a very specific show for a very specific audience. It's not a family show, so already that's an audience that you're taking out of it. I don't view it as being this massive global, not global, because clearly it is global, this massive checking every single box sensation. I view it as a sensation that's checking a lot of boxes and that a lot of people love, but that there will be another sensation that will check maybe a different group of boxes. And that's something for HBO to be concerned about as they start branching out into prequels and whatnot, is whatever boxes they're trying to check, if it's the same boxes, they're not going to reproduce it. And so in the same way that Fear of the Walking Dead has never at any point been the culturally relevant sensation that Walking Dead was at its peak, I suspect the spinoffs would be comparable. Something else will be comparable down the road, and you will do fantastic coverage writing 17 articles a day about it as it moves towards its premiere and its finale.
I look forward to that day, but I also look forward to the next few weeks of getting to spend day in and day out with the King in the North, the Mother of Dragons, all of my favorite friends. And that includes you, Dan. That includes you out there who are listening to this podcast. We will wrap it up there. As always, thank you for listening to Series Regular, the Hollywood Reporter's deep dive genre TV podcast. Subscribe to the show on your various podcast platforms. Email your questions and suggestions to seriesregular@thr.com or tweet them to me at Round Howard. You can also tweet your theories and questions to Dan. He's at The Fine Print on Twitter. Dan, I'm assuming you want a ton of theories to be added in your direction.
Sure, why not? The worst that can happen is that I shrug and ignore your theory.
That seems like a fairly likely outcome.
True story.
Dan and I are also going to be batting Game of Thrones back and forth all season long. We have a weekly column called Before the Storm, which is running on Friday mornings. So keep an eye out for that. THR.com/Game of Thrones is the way to find those columns and much more all season long. Until then, thank you so much, Dan. This was a blast.
Thanks for having me, Josh.